in a minute or two. Before that, I'd like to invite our three eminent panelists, maybe the only non-eminent panelists, Dr. K.K. Chakravarty, Mani Kaul, and Romi Khosla. K.K. Chakravarty is one of our real fine minds who's dedicated himself to various kinds of infrastructure in the government sector, most notably in Bhopal with the Museum of Mankind, and he thinks on many levels simultaneously with great... Sorry? And Ashok Vajpai. Sorry, forgot.
You said three.
No, that's what... 1, 2, 3, 4. Why have we got only 4? See, you're confusing me. There's only 4 chairs here, so mine suddenly... No, there's only 4 chairs. This is infrastructure building at its best. You destroy one pillar before you even start the whole process. Mind-boggling. Dr. K.K. Chakravarty, Ashok Vajpai, Romi Khosla, and Mani Kaul, and myself. And as I mentioned about Dr. Chakravarty, Ashok is one of those great anarchic, free minds who have dedicated themselves to the love of culture, both as a creative mind and as an infrastructure builder, most notably with Bharat Bhavan, given rise to one of the few unique museum structures, along with the Museum of Mankind, which Dr. Chakravarty sort of dedicated himself to. Unfortunately, like most institutions, once the founding inspiration sort of goes into another world, that institution slowly decays, and Bharat Bhavan is going through that period of decay at the moment, but hopefully it will be resurrected. Romi is a very dear friend and a man I have immense respect for. Again, very fine mind, thinks simultaneously on many levels, architect, conservationist by training, but a mind which is always looking for that love for knowledge, that ability to disseminate knowledge, share knowledge, build a better world. And then we have the person next to me who's in cuckoo land as much as I am, Mani Kaul, whose jokes about Uski Roti do not do justice to what a great filmmaker he is. He's now part of Oceans as a creative director for Oceanama, and a man again with phenomenal diversity of thought, love for music, love for art, love for filmmaking, a great teacher. And the 5 of us will discuss basically institution building and art cultural institution building in India. I will put forward what I've considered the guiding principles by which all great art cultural institutions around the world should be built, can be built, and why different paths have been taken by different institutions at different points of time in history. And each of them will present their take on those issues and bring about other thoughts which are dear to them. So before much ado, let's bring on Dr. Chakravarty, Ashok Vajpai, Romi Khosla, and Mani Kaul to please join me. Shiri Fort is actually the perfect example of how a material object building can destroy energy. 365 days, it's a decaying monolith which virtually no one wants to visit. In these 10 days, we try to re-energize it, and other people also doing different. And that, in a way, is a perfect indication of the state of Indian cultural institution building. A lot of ideas that I would like to get across are as follows. The first thing for any cultural institution built, art institution, is vision. If you don't have that grand vision, which can look into 20, 30 years into itself, you cannot really build a great institution, in my view. I think that is the first founding, necessary but not sufficient condition. That obviously, therefore, governments were given that responsibility because governments, it seems, is more capable than the private sector to have that forward planning ability. And as a result, most individuals, apart from a handful, have never really succeeded to build from scratch, create cultural art institutions which have sustained the test of time. So I think that is the first major condition, but in itself it means nothing, because obviously it's about sustaining that vision, carrying people to be part of that vision, and every year, if not every 6 months, renewing that vision. Second point comes to the legal structure. In today's material world, where the greatest of idealism collapses because of material failings or the inability to take on material responsibility, the question comes, in what legal framework is that institution placed? And in this world, we have basically two options. We have the charitable entity, the trust, the NGO, so to speak, or the government-aided entity, and we have the private sector corporate entity. And 99.9% of all art, cultural institutions in the world have chosen the charitable legal entity on which to build itself. Very few, if any, truly believe that great art, cultural, educational institutions can be built using a corporate entity. And therein lies, in my view, one of the biggest failures for cultural institution building. That why has this choice occurred? Why is it that the intelligentsia, the creative community, the scholars, the academic world, the people who visualized the museum chose that path? Was it forced upon them? Was it something that the government said, if you do not do this, we will not support you? And because you need the financial support of the government, you decided to build the charitable framework rather than the corporate framework, which requires you to take the onus of raising the funds. You, as a creative, the visualizer, have the responsibility of putting into place the financial structure. And therein comes the third major guiding principle. What is the financial structure on which you are going to sustain the institution building process? 99.9%, again linked to the first, because they chose this charitable NGO trust society framework, the funding was linked to donations or grants from the government, or some kind of donations from private philanthropists, or some kind of corporate sponsorship. These three became the major pillars of funding all institutions around the world, whatever the institution is. And that was linked to the legal framework. The other option is, can you generate your own funds? Can the art, cultural institution create projects, programs, ideas within that institution which generate interest? That interest culminates in the formation of knowledge, and that knowledge brings about a re-energization for the public who visits it, interacts with it. And from that dissemination of knowledge, wealth emerges. Wealth emerges as a byproduct. If that is possible, then you have another model. And that this other model obviously is what Oceans and Oceanama has been pursuing and continues to pursue. The fourth major issue, guiding principle on which debate comes, what is the intellectual framework that you fill up this institution with, so that you take into account not just two things, that yes, it's of interest to the public, it has some historical relevance, it has some current relevance, it has some relationship to circumstances, material circumstances of the day. But the other major point is this capable of generating the wealth you require to maintain your financial independence, your financial self-sufficiency? And if you have to intellectually program something which compromises the nature of the knowledge, is that something that you want to undertake to generate wealth? And therefore the question is there serious, uncompromising intellectual programming curatorial programming, which is possible without pandering to the common lowest denominator of popular appeal, which is capable of generating not just your own inner motivation to build an institution, but also to generate enough wealth that the public will continue to come in and be part of this process. And therein comes the biggest problem, because then you have to become a teacher. There is no other role, because it's not possible for the public and the finest minds to be at the same level. There has to be a process of teaching. Now the question is, if that teaching is also to be, for lack of a better word, entertaining, then how much of a time do you need to have on your side to transform great knowledge into entertaining knowledge? Is it 2 years? Is it 3 years? Is it 5 years? Is it 7 years? And in that 2, 3, 5, 7 years, how are you going to financially survive? Because the public is not going to be interested in these topics. So do you immediately compromise on the subject matter and start doing shows like, the great Guggenheim now realizes that we must do shows on fashion, nothing wrong with it. Fashion is knowledge, fashion is art, and rightly so. But it's taken them nearly 15 years of vacillating within the mind of intellectual debate that is fashion actually great knowledge. And then when they chose Armani to be their first representative, it was a major decision, not just for an institution like the Guggenheim, but all cultural institutions. That are you bringing in Armani to bring in the crowds? Are you to bring in the money? Or is there some genuine aesthetic, creative knowledge base that you wish to share with the world, which is important? So the intellectual framework is the next point. Next one is number 5, which is one of the most important, but the most boring, is what is the management systems by which you delegate out responsibility? Because in the cultural world, the biggest dilemma we face is how do we get the finest minds to want to be part of institution building? The greatest creative minds are on their own. And if some of those greatest creative minds decide to dedicate themselves to taking on administrative responsibilities for building institutions, then they have to make certain sacrifices. How long are they willing to make those sacrifices? First is, you make the sacrifice for yourself. You decide that I will not write a book, instead I will dedicate 2 years to building the institution. I will not make a film, I will dedicate 2 years to carrying the people so that there is a system in place. That's the first sacrifice. The second sacrifice, which is even more difficult, is how do I train the people who don't have that same passion, that same love, that same vision, that same expertise to carry on when we are gone? And therein lies the biggest dilemma for all institutions around the world, especially in India, that when the founding father or the founding mother or the founding vision dies, what happens to the institution? And we've seen it in the greatest of institutions. You take a case like Shantiniketan, when Tagore, I don't think anyone had more support at that time than Tagore. He was surrounded by some of the greatest minds, from Nandlal Bose to Asit Kumar Haldar to Ram Kinkar Bej to Binod Bihari Mukherjee, then later K.G. Subramaniam. So many others came in. But what Shantiniketan was in the 1930s and what Shantiniketan is in the 1970s is poles apart. One was a vibrant, great, educational, idealistic institution. The other is a dry institution barely trying to survive. So within 1.5, 2 generations, if institutions are to fail, then the next question comes, is institution building the right approach for creativity? Is it the right way to express creativity, share creativity, build a world in which creativity is respected? Now, with these 5 kind of main principles, the question is, why do the majority, and I'm not talking of 50%, why do 99% of all institutions veer towards one direction, and why is it that no one wants to take on a certain kind of risk? For 10 minutes, 5-10 minutes, I will just discuss why is it so difficult to go down the other path, and how that difficulty is now about, in my view, to fundamentally change the structure by which art cultural institutions are built. And in this I'll have to give, obviously, the example of oceans, because unless you have a living example, you can't persuade the world to change certain directions. In all these 5 points, let's assume the vision has been with oneself, and we take that for granted. The second point of the legal framework. When I came back to India, I also, like every idealist, thought charity is the answer, and I set up a charity. From 1996 to 2000, I functioned through a charity, believing that effort, knowledge, idealism, the love of people, volunteer effort, pursuing your goal without compromise is more than enough to build anything and share it with the public. And you don't need any other force, because that force will come and join you on your terms. And fundamentally, I was proved wrong on just one issue, and that issue was simply an economic issue. If you cannot bring the force of economic respect to your idealism, there is nothing in this world today. It's the way we built this system. There is no system that will respect the process in the long run, because you are in a material system. Now the question is, how do you change that material system? Old arguments are, one is from the outside. You fight as an anarchist, you fight as a person on the margins, you fight as part of the subaltern, you fight and you undermine the system through those kind of protests, and those have seen to be absolute failures in our world today, and they've led to a kind of deep injustice, deep sense of resentment, and a sense of violence which is now getting out of hand. The other system is, you create your Trojan horse, and you bring your Trojan horse to the center of the system, and through that process you then try to systematically change it. Now the question is, as always, that if you come into the system, will the dirt and the cynicism and the corruption and the compromising nature of handling wealth destroy your initial idealism and vision? And will you solely become part of the system? And therefore everything becomes irrelevant. Why bother doing that process? And again, that question comes down to one single relationship. What is the relationship between a creative mind and the generation of wealth? Is it something that is mutually incompatible? And if not, what is the nature of that relationship? Is it possible that the creative mind is best served to take on the responsibility of generating and redistributing wealth? Because a creative mind is dominated by their creative value system. They have to have a great love for uncertainty, experimentation. They have to have a deep compassion for all things in this world. They have to respect that every idea, every human being, every corner of the world is part of my spirit, and it does not matter where I take from, it's all part of the creative world. And as a result, that's what drives creativity, that madness, that obsession, that ability to say that I can visualize the world better than others. So you do have a value system which is as fluid, as overwhelming, as arrogant, as deeply rooted in the human spirit as the economic system. Because the economic value system is rooted on one great belief, that economics is the most fluid creation of mankind which can take on any form. Wherever you place economics, it will be able to allocate that item, that idea, that object. Whether it is emotions, whether it's spirituality, whether it's aesthetics, today economics has entered all these worlds because we have allowed it. The economic system is rampant. It was simply to be a medium of exchange for material objects, but sooner or later, because we have found no great alternative, it is a medium of exchange for everything, for ideas, for emotions, for aesthetics, for spirituality. The question was, where was the counter? And my firm belief is that counter comes from the creative value system. But the counter can only be effective if it is first and foremost takes on that battle, if it decides to take on that battle, and if it believes it can truly win this battle. And even if no one wants to destroy an economic system, what you want to do is discipline the economic system. You want to make the economic system serve the intentions with which it was built. And it was built to serve humanity, that wealth is nothing to do with the individual, that each person is like a trustee, like a custodian. You have that wealth for that period of time, and it's your responsibility to share it with the world as effectively as possible. Yes, you take care of those people close to you, but at the end of the day, it is not yours to do beyond a certain point. Now, that whole ethos has been destroyed. but it's been destroyed because the intelligentsia has retreated from fighting this battle. And therein lies the biggest problem that I see in our country, that the creative community, the scholarly academic intelligentsia has totally shied away from taking responsibility of handling wealth. And naturally, wealth then goes in the hands of people who don't share those values. And therefore, the nature of the economic system becomes something else. It depends. Economic systems are simply built by individuals and their values and their idealism. And therefore, the question is, why was this choice taken? And obviously, it was taken because the government decided to be a patron. And we got into the habit of believing that creativity and art, by being itself, cannot generate enough wealth, not just for itself, but surely it cannot generate wealth to tackle inequality, tackle poverty, tackle all the ills of an economic system. No one truly believes that. Even today, after 8 years of pushing, I truly don't believe I have even a handful of people who truly believe that through art, culture, and education, you can fundamentally change the material development of a nation and tackle all the ills which supposedly industrialization and other economic forces need to tackle. So therein lies that problem. What is the role of the intelligentsia in tackling the generation and simultaneously redistribution of wealth? Because if you become just the generator of wealth, then you are nothing but a business person. But if you are to be a creative person and remain a creative person and remain a member of the intelligentsia in its fullest sense, then your responsibility is not just to generate that wealth, but to simultaneously redistribute it. And hopefully redistribute it better than the taxation system which the government has created for redistribution of wealth. Otherwise, there's no point in getting into that battle. And therein lies the biggest problem. So that is a relationship we would like to talk about. These are the main kind of guiding forces. Oceans took a certain direction because I have pushed a certain direction, because of certain belief. If I die, the whole thing may just collapse. So far, Oceans is not an institutional on the scale on which there's enough inner momentum, belief, vision, ability to generate wealth, redistribute wealth, to make this a model for others to replicate and better. It is still an experiment. 10 years in India is nothing but, all you can do in 10 years is build a platform where you can be heard, nothing else. If anyone thinks in 10 years you can do anything but that, and therefore 30 years is the minimum by which you should go into your effort if you truly want to build great institutions. So in that first 10 years, what we have a platform now to say there is an alternative process mechanism by which institutions can be built. Maybe we are wrong, maybe we are deluded, maybe we are right. If we are right, then we need to carry the love and respect and trust and involvement of the public, and that involvement has to become deeper, because there is a chance of a new idealism. There is a chance for creativity to truly entrench itself in every daily activity of the individual. Everyone is a creative individual. There's no human being who is not creative. That creativity is suppressed 101 times during the lifetime, and by the age of 30, a handful sustain that journey. So the question is the intelligentsia, the creative world, ready to take on this challenge? And also remembering that outside the intelligentsia, in the banking world, in the management consultant world, the lawyers, the doctors, the software engineers, the technicians, all of them are also waiting to come into another world. Many of them will give up their jobs. Many of them will like to come and become writers, become philosophers, become filmmakers, become musicians, become dancers. They took a certain path because there was no option, because the educational system is structured in a certain way. So even if intelligentsia, all they have to do is take that lead. And without a shadow of a doubt, others will follow, because we all are tired with the way we have structured this world. There's no one in this world who's not tired with it. The injustice is now so deeply rooted in every part of daily life. So therein lies, from my point of view, can the great art cultural institutions be as effective, as powerful as the corporate structure? And if you adopt the corporate structure only as your legal entity, not for its ethos, not for its values, just for its legal entity, that it allows you the freedom to do what you want without having the hypocritical implication that you are not dedicating all your wealth to the charitable cause. Think about the irony that we have imposed on the legal structure, that we impose a charity and trust to 100% dedicate everything to their objective. And who are the people who build charities and trusts? Only the dedicated, only those who love the subject. And the corporate world has no such imposition. So ironically, we have forced the most constrained and negative legal framework on the most idealistic people, and we've given the most open, flexible framework to potentially the most corrupt people. And then we are in doubt, why do we have this kind of system in place? So whether we can use the corporate legal framework and build great cultural institutions from that legal framework is the task of the next 10, 15 years, in my view. And hopefully OCEANs will be able to sustain the journey and create a model for others to better criticize, replicate, whatever. Those are my opening points. I would now like Dr. Chakravarty to come in, then Ashok Vajpai, then Romi, then Mani, and then we will have an open forum for all of us to debate and question. Thank you.
Thank you. Actually, this question of creativity, I remember Anand Kumarasamy, who said that in India, artist is no special kind of man, but every man is a special kind of an artist. And it is in the Indian context that we have to discuss this question of creativity, vision, and managerial engagements, etc. And for having dealt with both federal administration and provincial administration and insurgency and culture at the same time, I have always felt this, that the biggest question is that of relevance of culture. I mean, is culture relevant? I mean, in fact, that is the biggest question mark. The way culture has been treated as a song and dance act, as a matter for stage, it is not considered relevant. So for the vast majority in the hinterland, it is not relevant the way it is enacted, I mean, on the Delhi stage or in the global stage. So unless culture is seen as not instrumental in development, but constitutive in development, there is no hope for culture. Unless, I mean, there is also a commitment to cultural impact assessment, apart from, you know, industrial impact assessment, other assessments, there is no hope for culture. So if one is trying to talk about a vision for culture, one has to really think of a cultural approach, a strategy, which helps us move from textualization of culture to contextualization of culture. I mean, from museumization of culture to demuseumisation of culture. From the curatorial approach to culture, where all these institutions really look after their own staff and their own curators. I mean, to an approach where the institutional managers are co-curators of the real curators of the biocultural habitats of the communities all over the country. So this is a primary problem. So in outlining a vision, one has to really define the role of culture and its relevance. As regards the legal framework, I understand what is being said, but then Justice Hidayatullah once distinguished three legal premises. One was res nullius, the second was terra nullius, and the third was lex loci res sete. What he meant was that for the community, the habitat is in India has been, what has been assigned by the sovereign is his, nothing else. Or what has been occupied by the sovereign and what has been excluded by the sovereign is his, nothing else. But the real approach should be that there is a role of cultural self-determination for the community, and the right to the preempted occupation of a biocultural habitat also gives purchase to that community on what should be done, and a kind of a right and privilege. So the legal structure in terms of structural, construction, I mean, I have seen that there is a letter of law and there is a spirit of law. And mostly, I mean, the spirit of law is violated by the letter of the law, and the letter of the law is violated in actual observance. So most of the institutions do not function according to the highest, formulations of idealism, which they have given to themselves, and the platitudes which they utter in their charter. Because these are like, when the Roman soldiers surrounded Christ and he was being, crowned with the crown of thorns, so they resorted to laughter. Why did they resort to laughter? Because his life was too big for them, and so they had to resort to laughter. They could not resort to tears. So these charters are highfalutin, but they can't be fulfilled because small men fill big shoes. As regards the financial aspect, once one thinks of making culture relevant, how will the marketing approach change? Shall we take away the product from the process, and the artifact from the habitat, the culture from the development, the festival from the natural and the human resource management strategies which inhere in each environment, and should we put them on the stage? Is that the best way to market them? I have also handled forestry and education and culture and election, and simultaneously, in parts of Chhattisgarh and Madhya Pradesh. And I have seen this happen, that through the joint forest management structure, as soon as one looked at the habitat, one set up many folklore medicine hospitals, and around that, one packaged the minor forest produce. Then also helped the communities package their products, and then put the minor forest produce federation at their disposal for marketing, and so the marketing improved. Now, of course, like in an institution set up by a corporate structure, even in the institutionalized structure of the government, it collapses. If you have corrupt individuals, at the helm. I don't know. Even in a democracy, where we are able to, cancel out most of the, contradictory impulses from time to time by a kind of a mutual clash of errors, this problem never goes. The systemic problem of how to manage the finances. Then there is another problem of IPR now. Now this is a society of spectacle, which also locks into the intellectual question, because we are getting domesticated in a global discourse in which fixed rather than unfixed knowledge has priority. There is a right only to expressions, not to ideas. And this is a country of orality, of contextuality, not of written heritage. And there is a vast amount of culture locked up in our orality. And if we are to be driven by a consciousness industry and a society of spectacle, and we are to be driven by high, fast-talking DJs and various kinds of only fusion music. There's nothing wrong with fusion music, but if it is the only brand of music invading the screen, there are no 100 varieties exist, but all those 100 varieties should have room. So this diverse difference has to have room, and that is the only way the intellectual efflorescence can occur. Otherwise, again, as what is said in Sanskrit, there is a shithila samadhittam, a slackening of attention. There is a voiding of content, and only the shape survives. And this is what is called in German Doppelganger, an evil imitation. So when you have a kind of a folkloristic product, which you divorce from its habitat, from its festival, from its context, and then commercialize it, embellish it, and then put it in either a musical program or a film program, and then you lose the necessity, embellishment, beauty, utility connection, then you have this problem of evil imitation. So then the question comes of teaching and managing. Managing of culture. Now, I can only talk about a few examples. I came to the National Museum of Mankind. Mr. Swaminathan was there. Mr. Vajpai was there. And I saw that it was a museum of hearts, though it was called a museum of communities. So what was the answer? The charter said, it could be easily read forwards into the future. It could be retold. So all that had to be done was to move from ex situ display to in situ regeneration, from collection of artifacts to recollection of ideas, from mere documentation to co-directed initiatives of the communities. Then we came to the National Museum as Director General. I saw that the National Museum was not national at all. It was less than Tehsil level museum. It was not providing any guidance to the 1,500 museums in the country. So he spread out and said that, well, let's talk to the museums, let's have the museums link up with the communities which have given them their tangible and intangible heritage, and how to animate this tangible heritage with intangible memories. Then in the Indira Gandhi National Center of Arts, I mean, we have a vast archive, but the archive is not galvanized. So we have spread out into the, remote territories and trying to get communities together to build up interlingual glossaries on dispute resolution, self-governance, on get all these satras and the monasteries to come together, conserve them as, diffusion centers of civilization, work around multiple foci, I mean, all over the country with the communities, and they generate the products and then provide them sustenance support there and then on the spot. Now the question is, I mean, this corporate management and the public-private partnership, I think it is of the utmost importance. I mean, most of these institutions have really insulated themselves. I mean, they are afraid. I mean, they suffer from a don't touch me, I mean, touch me notism syndrome. Because there is also a problem of lack of quality. I mean, the best people, I mean, with the best brains, do not necessarily live in culture, and so therefore there is also an intellectual shying away. I mean, from people who are better than you. So you try to live in your cocoon, and then since you have a lot of money to spend, so you organize spectacles, and these spectacles are there, but there is no real revitalization or regeneration of culture, no real marketing of culture. So, so far as the future is concerned, in this part of the world, I mean, I see this century as, since I am also an archaeologist of sorts, as a century where we should practice the archaeology of extinction. I mean, the current rate of extinction is 40,000 times more than the background rate of extinction. And there is not only an end of species, but there is also an end of birth. If we had 50% forest at the beginning of the century, and the earlier century, now we have about 18%. And so the dying of death and the loss of complexity, the coming in of radical simplification. I mean, before we know, the culture will be gone. So it is essentially necessary now for the institutions and the people to get together to work together for moving in step with the communities, the hundreds of communities in the country, look beyond their political geography at their mental atlas and redraw the mental atlas of the country and its neighborhood. Thank you.
As Neville was saying in the beginning, dozens of institutions have been set up, largely with government support, some of them directly run by the government, and there's not perhaps a single institution in this country which can be cited as vibrant and living. Most of them are either dead, half dead, or on the dying bed. Most institutions do not have even heads, experts or whatever. So they keep on lying vacant for, even I was the Director General of National Museum for a year and a half because we couldn't find a Director General. The system was such that whatever. The second is that we are talking of creating a cultural institution in the context of more than 4,000 communities in India and more than 300 languages in India. They have been sociologically explored. And each of these communities, these 4,000 communities, has a distinct culture of its own, and then it takes part in those epic streams of culture in this country. So to create one center, howsoever vibrant, howsoever dynamic, is not going to be enough. It has to be this culture did not have the kind of centrality that has been enjoyed. We have been a multi-centered culture. There are all kinds of approaches and such a vast plurality of approaches, philosophical viewpoints, ideological locations, that one single institution or similar single institutions all over the country cannot take place, cannot possibly cope with it. The legal structure which Neville Tuli talked about, has certainly been one of the most limiting factors. But as Kalyan was saying, that if you look at the objectives of these institutions, they are the finest possible objectives that an institution can think of. And yet, they have, in their performance, seriously deviated from those objectives and created these hypocrisies that Neville Tuli talked about. So I think time has come when an alternative legal structure should be thought of other than a charitable trust or a registered society. And if the corporate entity can do other things, why can't it also create a culture which is as a corporate entity? In terms of government, there are many things which once upon a time were thought had better be done by the government. Now the experience that we have a UPA government which is just not interested in culture. Both Sonia Gandhi and Manmohan Singh cannot be accused of having said a single word in their three-year tenure about culture, nor indeed have taken a single step either. The second model that we had an NDA government which thought culture consisted in history books and meddling with them and, doing this, that, and the other, having yoga or Jyotish being incorporated. So either you have a government which is totally indifferent, or you have a government which is intrusive. So across the board now, on the political spectrum, there seems to be a general consensus that culture does not matter. This is not a conscious decision that culture had better be left to the people and to the public-private partnership and this, that, and the other. These ideas are not there. It's just a total sort of ideological decision, just as there is an ideological decision, consensus, that everything has to be given over to the forces of globalization, and therefore the question is whether you open the door or the window or the room or whatever. So the competition is that whether he says that the one set says that I'll open the window, the other says no, I'll open the door, and the third one says you can come into the bedroom. So there is these subtle but very gross consensus which are operating, in which case any expectation from government will be, and good that Neville and Ocean are not looking to government. But this is also a fact that this will perhaps be the first cultural center to be set up in the 21st century. So far, there has been no other attempt of a scale and a vision. So the vision has to be guided by two factors, I think. One, a kind of a summing up of the 20th century, which has been a great century of creativity, courage, imagination, daring, and great disappointments and despair and what you have. And even in India, it has been a great century in many ways. After all, we fought for our freedom and got our freedom, and then perhaps we have compromised on our freedom or whatever in these 100 years. So there can be a summing up of 20th century in some ways. The center should do, critically, intellectually, aesthetically. And two, it has to think not merely in terms of 20, 30 years, which of course is fine, but to think that this is a center being created in the 21st century. So what is it that is required to be done in the 21st century? And I briefly think that some of the dichotomies that we inherited from the colonial baggage have to be rethought. Many of the things that we created, for instance, the simple dichotomy between craft and art, which was not there, but which got created. The interdependence between the arts was given a go-by. Whereas, as you would recall in Vishnu Dharmottar, the prince wants to be a sculptor. And then he asked the guru, so how can I become a sculptor? He said, you will have to learn dance. He said, how can I learn dance? He said, you'll have to learn music. How can I learn music? He said, you'll have to learn literature, poetry. So you cannot. Here was a tradition of tremendous interdependence, which did acknowledged that what music did, dance is not going to do. What dance did, literature is not going to do. And yet they are going to coexist. But somehow this intervention of modernity, the West-propelled modernity, created a dichotomy. So music and dance, particularly the classical music, classical dance, went one way, and theatre and literature and visual arts went the other way. So now there are dichotomies of these kinds which have to be rethought. And then a kind of a rethinking, not necessarily. You see, it's very strange that now more and more there is such an assault on visual imagination in India. Our visual imagination is under serious assault by all kinds of forces, and there's nothing that any institution can raise its voice or can do something about it. It's not merely interfering with a Baroda student is attacked these are also incidents which are taking place. There is a great deal of violence generated by art, which had never happened before, and it will give an impression as if art has become very, very crucial and the society is concerned and the people who get very excited. In fact, they are reading these paintings in a very gross, simplistic manner, and as if the subject of a painting is the painting. And therefore, the theme of the painting is the painting, and therefore it should be attacked if it is by Hussein or I don't know who. In this kind of a situation, where you have an indifference on the organized political level, you have collapse of public institutions, more or less, where you have a vast, Kalyan was referring to the orality. Here is a country which has lived, in fact, Vedas were not written down for 1,000 years. It was not allowed to be written down. They just continued by oral traditions. And there's music is not written down and things of that kind. No, Bhimsen Joshi sits with a notation paper before him and Ali Akbar Khan sings or plays. Now these factors which distinguish this culture, far too long we have tried to take up managerial practices and administrative structures and what you have from the West, without realizing that in this case, there is after all, how was this managed? It was not as if everything was mismanaged and we were waiting for the West to come and tell us how to go about it. How have we managed all this? How were these great repositories were created? How there were great libraries of manuscripts? How music was supported by the kings and royalty, not merely because how when Drupad, for instance, under the influence of the Sufis of Jaunpur, became the court music of the Mughal Empire, the Drupad which had occupied the Khayal, the Drupad which was occupying a place in the Mughal Darbar, went to the smaller princes like Gwalior and Rewa and a whole lot of Rajputana. Now all this has been happening here, and there are lessons to be learned from them. It is not simply that we. Therefore, I imagine that a cultural center of the kind that Neville is envisaging should both try to re-excavate the buried wealth and create new wealth. And my own experience has been trying to work with the government. And while I worked, my experience was not particularly bad, let me tell you that. But that was more because the kind of individual perhaps I am, and perhaps the kind of circumstances I happen to be working in. But today, you have people who are in positions of power and dealing with culture who have never dealt with culture in their life. There is no respect for expertise. there is no requirement for expertise either. So all these things have already happened. So I do not know how would this happen, but a new, daring, and perhaps desperate and urgent attempt should be made to think of an alternative. And that alternative must be thought in the context that everything else seemed to have failed. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashok. Again, many, many fine ideas. Again, the practice of it is what we must come to. Romi, may I ask you to?
Thank you, Neville, for including me in this luminous stage of personalities. I want to just address one or two basic things, maybe talk about the institutions that we find are failing around us. And we know we've inherited them from the British. The format, essentially, that you have a building, it's an impressive building always, there's a board of trustees, and then there's some sort of a research or performance or perhaps some data bank or collection that one goes to see. And I think more or less after independence, we have the institutions that we've put up, cultural institutions, are more or less the same actually. I don't think we've really managed to reformulate what we got as an idea of an institution, cultural institution, because essentially a cultural institution is a prescriptive institution. Why it has its origins in what the Europeans did was that somewhere along in the 19th century, the European mindset became prescriptive because of its colonization. And it began to treat people from distant lands, but also their own people, as patients, which needed to be prescribed ways of thinking and ways of seeing. This prescriptive approach remains with us. We actually treat, when you set up a cultural institution, you are by its very nature implying that you are going to treat the community at large as patients who will come in to improve their minds. Now, there are serious problems with that. Because it's based on a kind of intellectual understanding that the world is moving on and a lot of things are getting destroyed, therefore we are going wrong somewhere. If I look at India today, I don't find that. I find it enormously energetic. It's destroying a lot of junk. It's chucking aside all sorts of rubbish. And it is corrupt. It is absorbing at a terrific rate from everything that's around it. So I don't see that this society needs prescription at all. The very notion that we should then pass some kind of judgments upon the process of development itself is, to me, highly questionable. And it also brings one to think, if one is to set up a cultural institution, what is the role of that cultural institution? I think, let me just address what I think are the problems. Because a society that's developing in Asia, the rate we are developing, and there's no knowing how long this will last. It's a cycle, so it can't last forever. It does have problems. So we can talk about that. One of the and I'm talking about cultural institutions. To me, one of the basic problems is how do we now store and have random free access to creative knowledge. In the pre-colonial days, we had oral traditions and we had memory banks in each individual. Those don't exist anymore. They exist, but they're not available for particular areas of knowledge anymore. They're much freer now. We've inherited the great skills and spaces that are needed to store objects. We have lots of places to store objects, archives objects. It's very easy to create spaces in buildings and institutions to store objects. And it's very easy to also express concern about the decay and the need to conserve because society is moving on and the old is getting destroyed and history is getting destroyed and knowledge is getting destroyed. Or rubbish. I don't think you have to save anything, frankly. Because what you have to save is knowledge. Objects are themselves. We rename a road because we haven't been able to build a new one. So we have a great leader who dies, and for the 10th time we rename a road, right? Because in the middle of Delhi or in the middle of Bombay, we need to say, address this important thing. Because if our contemporary ability to not create something of significance, which is of greater significance than has been done in the past, then I think we should be obsessed with keeping what the past has kept for us. Preserved by chance. Because we get into a peculiar situation. You take something like Fatehpur Sikri, I'm an architect giving this knowledge. So what is left are the palaces. Where did everybody stay? Nothing is left of it. So we are going to form, as is in every history book, that here is the city of the Mughals. Rubbish, it's a court. There's no city there anymore. So it gives us a completely falsified understanding of knowledge. So preserving stuff has enormous dangers to it. But knowledge, no. So the first problem is how do we store knowledge? How do we make it accessible in today's world? The second knowledge I think that Neville has dealt with is the generation of funds through creative activity. Enormous challenge and many ways to do it. And the third problem for me is a very critical one. How does one address the problem of constant change? The change of context, change of society, change of money, change of people. And how does one safeguard the institution against the idiosyncrasies of its directors or its boards? So normal pattern is that you set up a charter. If you take the European tradition, who were faced with the same problem, they set up a charter and they say, right, this is the charter, this is the principles for which the board stands and if the institution stands, and we don't counter them. Next level down is the board decisions. So you have a whole hierarchy of capsules which are supposed to be touched only by some and not by others. Now, I don't understand in today's 21st century what is kinetic and what is static, what is permanent. What is the principle that you have to put down in a charter? And what is the principle that you can overrule and change as the requirements change? And the fourth one is, to me, the most important is how does one address the relationship between the institution you're creating and the community at large. And this is where the prescription will come in. Because prescription will come in when you regulate who can come in, when you regulate who can access your institution, when you regulate who can be successful in the vision that they have and they want to use your institution for doing something. These are very prescriptive things. And some completely different way has to be found to be able to share the institutional infrastructure, to make it available for random creative people who might walk off the street or whatever. And that you minimize the filtering process, or you have a filtering process which is much more open and goes through a time process. Because creative talent is by its nature dynamic, so it doesn't reveal itself in the beginning of a time process. Like a film director may make a great film and the third film he makes. So in these institutions where fledgling creative minds are trying to access infrastructure of an institution, very often that those minds are very sensitive and unable to give their best when they apply or they try their first attempts. And these are, I'm not putting forward problems which are insoluble. I'd like to look at Ocean myself as an alternative course. At least I think we have an opportunity for not taking a prescriptive role in culture. I'd like to see it as an institution that is stopping deterioration from taking place of knowledge. It's an institution that is removing obstructions. So it's not prescriptive. And if there's a principle that I personally would favor, it is simply the removal of obstructions in the creative process in this country, which is very different from prescribing what is required in this country. And I bring this principle to you from an old teacher of mine, Amartya Sen, for whom the process of economic development was basically trying to liberate freedoms. And this principle of removing obstruction was something that I had long discussion and evolved with him. In fact, it was evolved for the slums in Bombay, the study that I was doing there, which is essentially how do you look at the enormous creative entrepreneurial talent which exists in the slums. You don't give them loans. You don't set up shops for them. They are 10 times more capable of doing things that they are doing at the moment. You remove obstructions and let them out, let them free. And I certainly would suggest to Neville that Ocean thinks about this very, very carefully and formulates a completely different kind of institution, not one that has any worldview, any shared view, any of some of that stuff. The advantage of removing obstructions is that you address yourself to enormous number of microscopic problems at the same time, whereas you have no formula for the outcome of what's going to come out of this. Let it just come out. Thanks very much.